Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So this is a very good episode because we have the return of Kitty, which is like, I'm super excited about, dude, because I was like, it's like that we all went through the trouble of establishing this character, and I was like, oh, I thought her story was done, because the last time we saw her was like, I know it's season 3, but I think that was specifically season 3's finale, wasn't it? But it's like, we haven't seen her subsequently since then. It's like, she's back. Because I was wondering, I was like, oh, they're showing her through the intro and everything. I was like, is she coming back? I was like, why would she come back to town? Well, it seems like basically it's connected to someone that Sherlock knows is dead. Well, really quick, I got to bring up that, like, once again, those cases that kind of coincide. It's like you see one case wrapping up and leading into, like, the main case of the episode. This one deals with a guy where they couldn't find the gun on him. And then Sherlock's like, yeah, the gun, a small gun. He's like, oh, you think we can't find it? And Bell's like, oh, you don't think we can find a gun because it's small? He's like, no, I think you won't find the gun because it's here. He's like, it's very small. I don't think it's, because he's nervous is the reason why he's sweating. And then Bill's like, wait, you don't mean he's like, yeah, if you want to get the gun, you're just going to need this, and hands him a glove. I'm like, and it turns out that's exactly where it was. Nevertheless, Sherlock's, a friend of Sherlock, well, an associate of Sherlock's, his name is Cy, ended up dying. Cy was a prosecutor from Scotland Yard that, obviously he worked with back in the Scotland Yard days. Well, Kitty comes to town because she's saying that his murder isn't just a murder. I mean, his death isn't just a murder. I don't know why his murder isn't just a murder. His death isn't just because apparently it's like he died of a heart attack or something like that. It's like, no, he was murdered. And not just him, two other people that was associated with that particular case that they helped deal with back in the day. It was like one of the first things Kitty did as a detective. It's kind of like a trial run of like her, like first week as a detective or something like that. And it dealt with this guy named Eli. Basically, he struck a jogger lady and ended up killing her. It was a hit and run situation. It's even more messed up when you hear the whole story about like Sherlock explaining that basically she got wounded in a bombing or something in London, maybe I think it was, and that basically she lost kind of the mobility of her legs, but then she eventually gained it back to the point that she could start running marathons and stuff like that. Kind of like a very inspirational story. So he was saying that's why what happened to her became such a big thing. People wanted to find out who did this to her because it's like, it's even more tragic because like, oh, she went through such a tragic event and then she rose from it and now she got struck down. So and I guess in a sense it's almost like a very messed up sense of irony. I mean, once again, I don't think irony would be the right word, but it's like 3 of the people connected to the case are dead, and now the only two other people connected to it, Sherlock and Kitty. And apparently this guy, his name is Eli, and she's actually an American, is like the guy, he went to prison for 4 years, he's out. The reason why he has such a problem is because apparently he got beaten down in prison, because Kitty even brings it up. She's like, yeah, you never want to be American in a British prison, especially if you killed a Brit too, which is like, man, really? Because it's like, I mean, because along those same lines, because I've never really heard about like the British police system, jailing system. So I've never heard that before. That's kind of interesting. It's kind of like the same thing as like here in the States, how like, I'm sure it kind of applies everywhere, but you definitely hear about it more in the States. Like rapists and pedophiles kind of get it the hardest in prison because the moment people find out, they like beat the crap out of him. And Eli was kind of, in this particular case, Eli was beaten up because he killed a Brit and he's an American in a British prison. And so he ended up getting paralyzed because of it. So it's like, oh, the thought is that this whole thing turns out to be like, oh, some elaborate need for revenge. But then it's like, things take a twist because it's like, oh no, it's not one, because it's like, oh, he calls Sherlock and he's like, oh, I'm going to tell you the truth and everything. But then he ends up dead. It looks like apparent suicide. Even Bell's like, okay, tell me what I'm missing here. It's like, obviously there's certain signs. The fact he's paranoid and stuff like that. He thought we were closing in. So obviously he killed himself. Which to me, I argue is like, well, there's also the argument of the fact is that he called Sherlock. That to me is like, says that's not necessarily a man that's trying to alleviate his guilt. He wanted to meet Sherlock ahead of time. Like, I feel like if he was really that worried, getting scared that he's going to get caught or whatever, I feel like he would have done that, killed himself without talking to Sherlock. The person who killed him didn't account for the fact is that he contacted Sherlock. I mean, obviously it looked like maybe there's going to be more to it because he brought a gun along with him, but mainly that's because he had a feeling he was the next target. So it does beg up the question, is Sherlock and Kitty actual targets? I mean, so much more. I mean, it gets even more interesting because the guy that's supposed to be behind all these murders, because Sai's body got burned, so there was no way they could look at the evidence there. And there's the inmate lady who was covering up stuff, which you could tell she was lying because she was super suspicious. She didn't extensively do her job. It's like, oh, there's all these guidelines, these things that you didn't do, you should have done, but you didn't. It's like, oh, this is obviously an injection mark. It's like, oh no, it must have been like a tick bit him or something like that. It's like, really? Like, she would just be, like, every time they gave out, she's just, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to tell you. You see my report. I told you what's in it. Why are you asking me all these questions? And they're even being like, yo, talk to us. And you got more. Like, obviously, there's something more than just being paid here. Because I feel like, most people in these type of situations will finally break, especially when all the evidence is stacked against them. But she didn't blink an eye. She didn't falter. She's like, oh, the fact is you don't have a witness. It's like, lady, we talked. Yeah, you don't think we had a witness? Yeah, you had a coffee stain on this side of your shirt. She shut up then, didn't she? But it didn't stop her from being like, yeah, am I under arrest? Okay, I'm out of here. And it's like she walked away. So, which kind of ties in. I'll kind of get quickly to the end of the episode. Obviously, at the end of the episode, we see, like, them actually being, like, the brownstone being infiltrated by the FBI, that basically they're going in there, and Sherlock's like, yo, telling Joan to, like, take Kitty, get her away from there, because it's like, oh, do you think the government has something to do with all these murders and stuff like that? It's like, well, maybe. He goes in there and talks to a guy, I think his name is Anson, the guy that he was looking for, the redhead guy. Well, apparently his hair has dyed, but basically that he is the one behind all this, and so he arrests Sherlock, and he's like from the defense, was it some kind of defense ministry, intelligence ministry or something like that, and he's arresting Sherlock, and Sherlock's for what? He's like, oh, be answered in due time. So I was like, okay, so now we're going back to the point that maybe this is a lot higher than we think it is. Maybe he's arresting Sherlock because, like, maybe he doesn't have anything to do with these murders. Maybe necessarily he's covering up things because he doesn't want to get local people involved. Maybe this, like, goes way above board. Because to me, I was starting to think maybe this is all ties back to his wife, that his wife lied about everything. But it's like, no, obviously there's more to this. Maybe it is type of government type of situation, like these three particular people, maybe even Eli. Maybe those three particular people, like, convicted Eli for a specific reason. Maybe it's like a situation like the reason why he was there in the first place is because he's associated with someone. They're like, hey, we need to get this person out of the way so that we can get someone to replace him in a situation. Say, like, let's use the example of, like, it's some kind of drug deal that basically he's a part of this long-reigning drug operation type of situation. And he plays, like, the carrier in the situation. It's like, well, basically remove him from the equation, and then they can have that group trying to find someone else to replace him, and they find someone they implanted in. And so maybe this is all about covering that up, trying to cover up government involvement in certain things. Like, I don't know. Because definitely he is the one that burned the body because of the red hair and everything that was when the body was being dug up in his, Sai's body was being dug up in his. But why to such extremes? Like, what is it? Because that's also what I'm thinking, like, why that ME lady would not say anything, because it was like the government going down. It's like, so lady, if you say anything, you're going to jail for a long time. It's like, yeah, they could charge you and stuff like this, but we can make your life a living hell. Like, we can make you go to jail. We can make things for your extended family even worse for you. So it's like, that's how I'm chalking it up. I'm wondering, does this have anything to do with Kitty at all? Maybe the reason why he wanted to keep Kitty away is because of who she is, and basically if the government's involved, maybe they know exactly what she's done, maybe try and bring stuff up, obviously from her past, to kind of use against her. Which is another element of this episode that I was just kind of found very interesting. I mean, obviously, like I said, it's super nice to have Kitty back. It's like, now we have like a team of 3 detectives and everything. I love the moment of, like, yeah, I want you and Watson, I want Kitty, I want you and Watson to go talk to Gregson about something. And they're like, whoa, you want her to go to Gregson's like, yeah, why wouldn't I go? And he's like, well, the fact of the matter is you dipped a guy in acid the last time you were around here, and the fact of the matter is Gregson wanted to capture you for that because he really knew you did it. So, like, don't you think this is a little awkward? It's like, oh, he's like, see, she says it's okay, so it's okay to go. And he sends them on their way. And then she's like, okay, Watson's like, okay, Kitty, so how sure about this are you? She's like, well, I wrote him a letter and everything, and it's just, we seem cool. She's like, how sure are you? She's like, I don't know, I'm mostly, partially sure, 60-40. And it turns out Gregson hugs her and it's like, oh, why didn't you tell me? He's like, oh, everything is good. Which is weird because I would have assumed, I guess it's similar circumstances as the whole M situation originally back in season 1 with Sherlock. Remember, Sherlock went off the deep end himself and did something similar to that because he's like, oh yeah, M, you're the one that killed Irene. I had to think about it because I was about to say like I had to think about it for a second. I was like, oh, what was Moriarty's real name? Right. Yeah, Irene. I mean, her fake name. But I was thinking it might be connected to that, but it turns out not. I thought it was, similar circumstances like that. So eventually he forgave Sherlock with enough distance in between because Sherlock didn't kill the dude, but obviously he tortured him and everything. Lost a little trust there. But between him and Kitty, it's like he understands why she did it. He really wishes she didn't do it, but at very least she didn't kill him. And the guy didn't say anything either. So more so the situation of like it basically bring up his connection to Kitty. So it's like obviously I guess in his situation it would be best not to say anything, which I can only assume that might rear its ugly head again. This like the fact is that that's connected to Kitty's storyline, and I'm wondering does this have something to do with that? Because I forgot what his whole positioning was, like what he did exactly. I don't think he had a government job or anything like that, did he? Not to my knowledge, not unless he is friends with people in high places and that this was like some long-winded reach around to basically deal with Kitty, because he, still pissed. I feel like that's got to be tied to this some shape or form, obviously, or maybe that storyline's completely done. I mean, just kind of have to wait and see. But obviously, Joan is very suspicious of the fact is that Kitty's acting differently, not getting enough sleep, the fact that she's just wandering off on her own, she's not staying with Sherlock and her, she's like, oh, she's acting a little off. And then Sherlock's like, well, the fact of the matter is she just, she's allowed to do her own thing. And then Watson's like, well, the fact that you haven't kept an eye on her these past 2 years is like, no, whatever she's doing, she's a detective. She can do her own thing. And the fact is that she's a fellow colleague that came here to ask us for help. It's as simple as that. Which, obviously, Joan breaks into her house to get the answers, which I'll admit it, that nanny is pretty badass holding her own against Watson, which I assume that's kind of the reason why Kitty hired her in the first place. But we find out that Kitty is a mom. She got pregnant. At first I was like, is it? I was like, no. Because I forgot that whole situation happened, like, she was held for like 3 years. So obviously it wasn't like that type of situation. It's like some guy that she had met beforehand that was kind of an on and off thing. And it's like, they're not together right now, but it's a situation where it's like, oh yeah, she still's like, oh yeah, he's a good parent. He's very supportive and everything with me and Archie. And it's like, oh, I'll go to Aunt Watson. I'm like, oh, it's so adorable. And she's like, that's why she's been so weird, acting flaky lately. And it's like, oh, the reason why she didn't say anything because she knew like, oh, if I told you guys the truth, you guys would have benched me. And then Watson's like, okay, well, that's not the truth. And then actually, I like her reasoning. It's like, it's a very interesting reasoning. She hasn't said anything. The main reason why is because she's actually afraid to tell Sherlock the fact is that she wants to quit being a detective. It's like Sherlock dedicated so much of his time and part of his life in making me a detective, and he's like, here I am up and quitting. Obviously, she has a good reason because it's like, I'm a mom now, and it's like being a detective, long hours and detective work. Because she's also working with a group that's helping destroy, like deal with sex trafficking, like taking the people who are victims of it and giving them a new place to go. Well, not necessarily a new place to go, but taking them back home. So even this, she's like, I'll work on it as an advisor, on a consulting level, but I won't actually participate. So it's kind of like reduce obviously the danger level that she'd be in as well as her work hours so that she could be more of a parent, So she's afraid to tell Sherlock the truth, but Watson's like, you give him too little credit. Now, what was very interesting to me is the fact is that she showed Archie to Sherlock, and for the first time you see Sherlock like befuddled. He's like, oh, I gotta. It's like, I've never in the entirety of this series, I've never seen you like that. Never. That's a new one. It's like, why were you like that? Because there was also the conversation of like, obviously the preview brought it up, the fact that she's like, I've never said this to anyone, but I love you, which begs the question, could there possibly be a her and Sherlock going forward? I mean, they're both single. I mean, obviously she's a parent, so that's going to influence things a bit, but I don't know. That was just kind of interesting to me. Just like the fact that she's a parent and everything, and it is good. Like after everything that she went through in her life, she needed some real good in her life. Being a mom it's good. It's a beautiful thing. And I'm sure it brightens up her life, even more so. So I don't know. It's like it's good that she has like something good from her life, like after everything she's been through. Um, Then the fact of the matter is that they brought Kitty back. I'll bring it up again. Why not bring like his brother back too? Like the last time we saw his brother was like season two's finale. We haven't seen him again. Which I mean, this would be the perfect opportunity because we're dealing with some government stuff. It's like, yo, his brothers come up in conversations, but never like, oh, I've talked to my brother. It's just conversation between him and Joan. Also, I love the fact that when he was talking to Eli earlier, it's like, oh, this is a very private club, and he's like, oh yeah, my dad's a long-standing member of this. Plus, he's part of an evil cabal, and so like I can never do any wrong. And I'm like, I love that you just randomly all said that. It's like, where's that storyline at? It's like, I've obviously see John Noble pop up in Sleepy Hollow a little bit, so I was like, hey, come on, John, come on, pop up as Papa Holmes. But maybe that won't obviously be. I mean, that's probably a situation where I mean, I'm sure it really comes down to when they want to introduce certain stories because obviously, like I said, the main storyline is the SBK situation with Shinwell. This is kind of its own thing right now. I'm very interested to see what this is all about because I mean, like I said, I've thrown out my ideas about it like so far, but I'm very interested to see what it turns out to be because obviously we'll get a continuation of this next episode. So I'm very eager to find that out. So yeah, but really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.